She rescued a cat from a storm drain. What happened next will shock you. The biting wind whipped down Elm Street, stinging Margaret O'Connell's cheeks as she hurried along the sidewalk. It was a typical January morning in Asheville, North Carolina, the kind where the sky was a steely gray, promising snow, and the mountains in the distance were shrouded in a misty haze. Margaret, bundled in a thick wool coat and a hand-knitted scarf that had seen better days, clutched a reusable grocery bag to her chest, her mind already on the warmth of her small apartment and the cup of tea she planned to brew. Margaret was 72, a widow of 5 years, and lived a life of quiet routine. Her days were punctuated by small rituals: morning coffee, a crossword puzzle, a walk to the local market, an afternoon spent reading or watching classic movies, and an early dinner. Her apartment, on the second floor of a modest brick building just a few blocks from the bustling downtown, was her sanctuary, a place filled with the ghosts of memories and the comforting silence of solitude. She'd lived in Asheville all her life, seen it change from a sleepy mountain town to a thriving artsy hub. But her own world had gradually shrunk, circumscribed by loss and the inevitable contraction of life that comes with age. Her husband, Thomas, had been a carpenter, a man of few words but boundless kindness. Their life together had been simple but full, marked by shared laughter, quiet evenings on the porch, and the comforting rhythm of their intertwined lives. His passing, after a swift and brutal battle with cancer, had left a void that Margaret found impossible to fill. Her children, grown and with families of their own, lived far away, one in California, the other in New York. They called, of course, and visited when they could, but their lives were full, their visits brief, and Margaret often felt like a distant observer of their happiness. As she neared the corner of Elm and Market Street, a sound pierced through the usual urban cacophony of faint, high-pitched mewling. Margaret paused, her brow furrowed in concentration. She listened again. It was definitely a cat, and the sound seemed to be coming from the street below. She peered down at the storm drain, a grate set into the curb, half covered in a slush of melting snow and decaying leaves. The mewling grew more desperate. Margaret, her knees protesting slightly, knelt down on the cold pavement, trying to get a better look. Through the grimy bars of the grate, she could just make out a small, shivering shape of a ginger cat, its fur plastered to its skinny frame, its eyes wide with fear. It was trapped, clearly unable to climb back up the slippery, steep sides of the drain. A businessman in a sharp suit hurried past, glancing at Margaret and the drain, but not slowing his pace. A young couple, engrossed in their phones, walked by without even noticing. The city, it seemed, was too busy, too preoccupied to hear the cat's cries. Margaret's heart ached. She couldn't just leave it there. The thought of the small creature, cold, wet, and alone, was unbearable. But she also knew she couldn't rescue it herself. She was no longer as strong or agile as she used to be, and the drain was deep and treacherous. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the traffic noise. "Don't worry, I'll get you out." She stood up, her joints creaking in protest, and pulled out her old flip phone, a relic from a simpler time. Much like herself, she had resisted getting a smartphone, finding the technology overwhelming and unnecessary. Now, though, she was grateful for its simplicity. She dialed the number for the Asheville Animal Rescue, a local organization she had supported with small donations over the years. While she waited for someone to answer, she kept talking to the cat, her voice soft and reassuring. "It's all right, little one. Help is coming. Just hang on." Finally, a woman with a brisk, friendly voice answered. Margaret explained the situation, her voice trembling slightly with urgency. The woman assured her that a rescue worker would be there as soon as possible. The wait felt interminable. Margaret paced back and forth on the sidewalk, her eyes constantly returning to the drain. The cat's mewling had subsided, replaced by a weak, intermittent whimper. She worried that it was giving up. Finally, a white van with the Asheville Animal Rescue logo pulled up to the curb. A young man, no older than 30, jumped out, his face etched with concern. He introduced himself as David and quickly assessed the situation. "Looks like we got a scared little fella down there," he said, his voice calm and professional. He pulled out a pair of heavy-duty gloves and a small net. Working together, David and Margaret managed to pry open the heavy grate. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves wafted up. David carefully reached down into the drain, coaxing the cat towards him with gentle words. The cat, initially hesitant, finally allowed itself to be scooped up into the net. As David lifted the cat out, Margaret gasped. It was even smaller and skinnier than she had imagined. Its ginger fur was matted and dirty, its ribs clearly visible beneath its thin coat. It shivered uncontrollably, its eyes squeezed shut. "He's freezing," David said, wrapping the cat in a thick towel he had brought from the van. "And probably dehydrated. He needs to see a vet right away." Margaret's mind raced. She hadn't thought this through. She had called for help, but what now? She couldn't just send this poor creature off to a shelter. "I'll take him," she blurted out, surprising even herself. David looked at her, his expression questioning. "Are you sure, ma'am? It's a big responsibility. He'll need a lot of care." Margaret looked at the small, shivering bundle in David's arms. She saw a reflection of her own loneliness, her own vulnerability. She saw a creature in need of kindness, of warmth, of a safe place to land. "Yes," she said, her voice firmer this time. "I'm sure. I'll take him home." And with that decision, made in the cold, harsh light of a January morning, Margaret's quiet, solitary life took an unexpected turn. She had no idea what the future held, but as she followed David back to her apartment, carrying the small, rescued cat, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of hope, a spark of purpose. The silence of her apartment was about to be broken, and her heart, long dormant, was about to be stirred. The ride back to Margaret's apartment was quiet. The ginger cat, wrapped snugly in the towel, had stopped shivering and lay still in her arms, seemingly exhausted. Margaret stroked its head gently, feeling the fragile bones beneath its thin fur. She wondered what its life had been like before ending up in that drain. Had it been a stray, born on the streets? Or had it been someone's pet, lost and frightened? Once inside her apartment, Margaret carefully placed the cat on a soft blanket she had spread out on the living room floor. The apartment was small but cozy, filled with the accumulated possessions of a long life. Bookshelves lined one wall, overflowing with well-worn paperbacks and family photo albums. An old, comfortable armchair sat by the window, overlooking the street below. The air was warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. The cat remained huddled on the blanket, its eyes half closed. Margaret watched it anxiously, unsure what to do next. She had never owned a cat before. Thomas had always been allergic, so pets had never been a part of their life together. She felt a wave of inadequacy, a fear that she wouldn't be able to care for this creature properly. She remembered what David, the rescue worker, had said about the cat needing to see a vet. She looked up the number for the nearest animal clinic in the phone book and made an appointment for later that afternoon. In the meantime, she tried to make the cat comfortable. She filled a small bowl with water and placed it near the blanket. The cat didn't move. She then remembered she had a can of tuna in the cupboard, a leftover from a grocery trip, when she had mistakenly thought her daughter was coming to visit. She opened the can, the smell of fish filling the air. She spooned a small amount of tuna onto a saucer and placed it next to the water. This time the cat stirred. It slowly lifted its head, its nose twitching. It took a tentative lick of the tuna, then another and another. Soon, it was eating with a desperate hunger, its tiny body trembling with each bite. Margaret watched, a feeling of relief washing over her. At least it was eating. That was a good sign. As the cat finished the tuna, it looked up at Margaret, its eyes a startling shade of amber meeting hers. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two lonely souls in a shared space. Then, the cat let out a soft, rumbling purr. It was a faint sound, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Margaret felt a lump form in her throat. It was the first sign of affection, of trust from this small, battered creature. She reached out a hand, slowly, hesitantly, and gently stroked the cat's back. The purr grew slightly louder. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're home." The afternoon passed slowly. Margaret sat in her armchair, watching the cat as it slept, curled up on the blanket. She found herself constantly checking on it, making sure it was still breathing, still there. She had already started to think of names. Rusty, she thought, because of its ginger fur. Or maybe Copper. The vet appointment was a blur of activity. The vet, a kind woman named Dr. Emily Carter, examined the cat thoroughly. She confirmed that it was a male, probably about 6 months old, severely underweight and dehydrated, but otherwise surprisingly healthy. She gave him some fluids and a deworming medication, and she showed Margaret how to administer some oral antibiotics. "He's a lucky one," Dr. Carter said, handing Margaret a bag of special food for underweight cats. "He must have been down that drain for a while. Another day or two, and he might not have made it." Margaret shuddered at the thought. She couldn't imagine having walked past, ignoring the cat's cries. "He needs a name," Dr. Carter said, smiling. Margaret hesitated. "I was thinking Rusty." Dr. Carter chuckled. "It suits him. Rusty it is." The name felt right. It was simple, unassuming, just like the cat itself. The first few nights were difficult. Rusty was restless, pacing around the apartment, meowing softly. He seemed disoriented, unsure of his surroundings. Margaret slept fitfully, waking up at every sound, checking on him constantly. She left a small lamp on in the living room, hoping to provide some comfort. Slowly, gradually, Rusty began to settle in. He explored every corner of the apartment, sniffing at furniture, batting at dust bunnies, discovering the joys of sunbeams streaming through the window. He started to eat more regularly, gaining a little weight, his fur losing some of its dullness. Margaret found herself talking to Rusty constantly, telling him about her day, about Thomas, about her children. She knew he couldn't understand her words, but it felt comforting to have something to talk to. The silence of the apartment was no longer oppressive. It was filled with the soft sounds of Rusty's purrs, his playful meows, the gentle tapping of his paws on the hardwood floor. One evening, as Margaret was reading in her armchair, Rusty jumped up on her lap. He circled around a few times, kneading her legs with his paws, then curled up into a tight ball, his head resting on her thigh. He started to purr, a loud, rumbling sound that vibrated through Margaret's body. She gently stroked his fur, feeling the warmth of his small body against hers. Tears welled up in her eyes. It was a simple gesture, a cat seeking comfort, but it meant the world to her. It was a sign of trust, of affection, of a bond forming between them. She was no longer alone. She had Rusty, and Rusty had her. The loneliness that had settled over her like a shroud was beginning to lift, replaced by a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She had rescued a cat, but in a way, the cat had rescued her too. Weeks turned into months, and a comfortable routine established itself in Margaret's apartment. The harsh winter gradually gave way to a hesitant spring, the snow melting, the trees budding, and the days growing longer. Rusty, no longer the emaciated, frightened creature he had been, was thriving. He had gained weight. His ginger fur was now sleek and glossy, and his amber eyes shone with health and contentment. Mornings began with Rusty's insistent meow, a demand for breakfast that Margaret found increasingly endearing. She would get out of bed, her joints stiff from sleep, and shuffle into the kitchen, where Rusty would be waiting, tail twitching impatiently. She would fill his bowl with the special food Dr. Carter had recommended, and he would eat with gusto, his purrs a constant background hum. After breakfast, Margaret would make herself a cup of tea and settle down with the newspaper and her crossword puzzle. Rusty would often join her, curling up on the armrest of her chair, or sometimes even on her lap, making it difficult to see the clues. She would gently push him aside, but he would always return, his presence a comforting weight. Their walks became a daily ritual. At first, Margaret had been hesitant to take Rusty outside, fearing he might run away. But Dr. Carter had suggested that with a proper harness and leash, it would be good for him to get some fresh air and exercise. She had found a bright red harness that fit him perfectly, and after a few initial struggles, Rusty had adapted to it surprisingly well. Their walks were slow and leisurely, dictated by Rusty's curious nature. He would stop to sniff every lamppost, every bush, every crack in the sidewalk. He would chase after butterflies, stalk squirrels, unsuccessfully, and occasionally try to pounce on fallen leaves. Margaret found herself smiling more often, enjoying the simple pleasures of the outdoors, the warmth of the sun on her face, the sights and sounds of her neighborhood. She started to notice things she had never paid attention to before: the intricate patterns of the bark on the old oak trees, the cheerful chirping of the birds, the colorful blooms in the flower gardens. Rusty, in his own way, was reconnecting her with the world, with the beauty that existed even in the most mundane of surroundings. Afternoons were often spent in quiet companionship. Margaret would read, knit, or watch her favorite old movies, while Rusty would nap in a sunbeam on the windowsill, or play with his favorite toy, a small, crinkled ball filled with catnip. He would bat it around the apartment, chasing it under furniture, pouncing on it with playful energy. Evenings were the most peaceful time. Margaret would prepare a simple dinner for herself, and Rusty would always be nearby, watching her with his intelligent amber eyes, occasionally rubbing against her legs, purring softly. She would often share a small piece of her chicken or fish with him, a treat he clearly relished. After dinner, they would settle down in the living room. Margaret would turn on the television, usually to watch the news or a classic movie, and Rusty would curl up on her lap, his purr a constant, comforting rumble. She would stroke his soft fur, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, and a sense of deep contentment would wash over her. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for so long was fading, replaced by a feeling of quiet joy, of companionship, of being needed and loved. Rusty wasn't just a pet. He was her friend, her confidant, her furry little shadow. He filled the silence of her apartment with his presence, his purrs, his playful antics. He gave her a reason to get out of bed in the morning, a reason to smile, a reason to engage with the world again. One particular evening, as Margaret was watching a black and white film, a scene unfolded on the screen that resonated deeply with her. A woman, widowed and living alone, was befriended by a stray dog. The dog, in its unwavering loyalty and affection, helped the woman rediscover the joy in life, to heal from her grief. Margaret felt tears welling up in her eyes. She looked down at Rusty, who was asleep on her lap, his body rising and falling with each gentle breath. She stroked his fur, feeling the soft texture beneath her fingers. The scene in the movie mirrored her own life so perfectly. She, too, had been lost in grief, in loneliness, until this small ginger cat had stumbled into her life, bringing with it a light that had dimmed for far too long. She realized that she had been talking to Rusty more and more, sharing her thoughts, her memories, her fears. She would tell him about Thomas, about their life together, about the happy times and the sad times. She would talk about her children, about her worries for them, her hopes for their future. She knew he couldn't understand her words, but it didn't matter. It was the act of speaking, of sharing, that was healing. One day, she found herself rummaging through an old box of photographs. She hadn't looked at them in years, the memories they held too painful to revisit. But with Rusty by her side, curled up on the floor at her feet, she felt a sense of courage, a willingness to confront the past. She pulled out a photo of her and Thomas, taken on their wedding day. They were both so young, so full of hope and dreams. She smiled, remembering the joy of that day, the love that had bound them together. She showed the photo to Rusty. "This is Thomas," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My husband. He would have loved you, Rusty. He was a kind man, a good man." Rusty looked up at her, his amber eyes seeming to hold a depth of understanding. He rubbed his head against her hand, as if offering comfort. Margaret continued to go through the photos, sharing memories with Rusty as she went. She showed him pictures of her children when they were young, of family vacations, of holidays celebrated together. With each photo, a piece of her past came back to life, no longer shrouded in sadness, but bathed in the warm glow of remembrance. Rusty, her silent, furry companion, was her anchor, her connection to the present, and her bridge to the past. He was a living, breathing reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always the possibility of finding love and companionship in unexpected places. He had taught her that life, even in its later stages, could still hold surprises, could still offer moments of joy and connection. The routine they had established was not just a set of daily habits. It was a tapestry woven with threads of love, companionship, and mutual dependence. It was a testament to the simple, yet profound, power of a bond between a woman and her cat, a bond that had transformed both of their lives. The small apartment on Elm Street was no longer just a place to live. It was a home filled with warmth, laughter, mostly Margaret's at Rusty's antics, and the quiet, comforting presence of a ginger cat named Rusty. The fateful morning when she had heard his cries seemed like a lifetime ago, a distant memory from a life that was no longer hers. The gentle rhythm of Margaret's life with Rusty continued, but beneath the surface of their comfortable routine, memories of the past stirred. The quiet evenings, the shared meals, the simple act of stroking Rusty's fur, all these things triggered echoes of a life that had been, a life filled with love and loss. One afternoon, while dusting the bookshelves that lined one wall of her living room, Margaret came across a small, leather-bound diary. She hadn't opened it in years, the handwriting on its pages a painful reminder of a younger, happier self. She sat down in her armchair, Rusty jumping on her lap, purring expectantly. She opened the diary, the pages brittle and yellowed with age. The first entry was dated over 50 years ago, when she was a young woman, full of dreams and aspirations. She read about her first meeting with Thomas, their courtship, their wedding, the early years of their marriage. Her words painted a vivid picture of a love that was deep and enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect, affection, and shared dreams. As she read, tears welled up in her eyes. She remembered the excitement of building a life together, the challenges they had faced, the joys they had shared. She remembered Thomas's quiet strength, his gentle humor, his unwavering support. He had been her rock, her anchor, her best friend. She turned the pages, reading about the birth of their children, the milestones of their lives, first steps, school plays, graduations, weddings. She remembered the pride she and Thomas had felt in their children, the love that had filled their home. But the later entries in the diary were tinged with sadness. She wrote about Thomas's illness, the devastating diagnosis, the agonizing months of treatment, the final, heartbreaking goodbye. Her words were raw with grief, with the pain of losing the love of her life. She closed the diary, her hands trembling. The memories were overwhelming, a flood of emotions that she had tried to keep buried for so long. She looked down at Rusty, who was now asleep on her lap, his body rising and falling with each gentle breath. "Oh, Rusty," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I miss him so much. I miss him every single day." Rusty stirred, sensing her distress. He lifted his head and looked at her, his amber eyes filled with a gentle, knowing gaze. He licked her hand, a small, comforting gesture. Margaret realized that Rusty, in his own way, was helping her to grieve. He was providing a safe space for her to express her emotions, to confront the pain of her loss. He was a silent witness to her tears, a constant source of comfort and support. In the days and weeks that followed, Margaret found herself talking to Rusty more and more about Thomas. She would tell him stories about their life together, about the funny things he used to say, the kind things he used to do. She would describe their trips to the mountains, their evenings spent listening to music, their quiet moments of shared contentment. As she talked, she realized that the memories were no longer just a source of pain. They were also a source of strength, a reminder of the love that had shaped her life. She was beginning to heal, to find a way to live with her grief, to carry the memory of Thomas with her, not as a burden, but as a cherished part of who she was. One evening, she decided to call her daughter, Sarah, who lived in California. They hadn't spoken in a while, their conversations usually brief and superficial. But tonight, Margaret felt a need to connect, to share her feelings. She told Sarah about Rusty, about how he had come into her life, about how much he had helped her. She talked about Thomas, about her memories of him, about the pain of her loss. Sarah listened patiently, her voice filled with concern and understanding. She told Margaret how much she missed her father, too, and how grateful she was that Margaret had found Rusty. "It sounds like he's been a real blessing, Mom," Sarah said. "I'm so glad you have him." Margaret felt a warmth spread through her. It was the first time in a long time that she had felt truly connected to her daughter. Rusty, in his own way, had helped to bridge the distance between them, to open up a channel of communication that had been closed for too long. The echoes of the past were still there. The memories of Thomas would always be a part of her, but they no longer haunted her. They were woven into the fabric of her present, alongside the comforting presence of Rusty, the gentle purr that filled the silence, the warm fur beneath her hand. She was learning to live with loss, to find joy in the present, to appreciate the simple gifts of companionship and love. Rusty had not replaced Thomas, but he had filled a void, had brought a light back in her life, had helped her to find a way to move forward, to embrace the future, even as she cherished the past. The peaceful rhythm of Margaret's life with Rusty was shattered one crisp autumn morning. Margaret woke up feeling unusually weak and dizzy. She tried to get out of bed, but her legs felt like jelly, and she stumbled, nearly falling. A sharp pain shot through her chest, and she gasped for breath. Rusty, who was usually waiting by the door for his breakfast, sensed something was wrong. He jumped onto the bed, meowing loudly, nudging her face with his head. Margaret managed to reach for the phone on her nightstand, her hand trembling. She dialed 911, her voice barely a whisper. She told the operator that she was having chest pain and difficulty breathing. The ambulance arrived quickly, the sirens screaming through the quiet morning streets. The paramedics were efficient and professional, checking her vital signs, administering oxygen, and preparing her for transport to the hospital. Margaret's mind was racing. She was terrified. Was she having a heart attack? Was this the end? She thought of Rusty, alone in the apartment. Who would take care of him? As the paramedics were lifting her onto the stretcher, she managed to say, "My cat, Rusty, he's inside. Someone needs to take care of him." One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, reassured her. "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll make sure someone takes care of your cat." At the hospital, Margaret was rushed into the emergency room. Doctors and nurses swarmed around her, hooking her up to monitors, drawing blood, asking questions. The pain in her chest was intense, and she felt a sense of overwhelming fear. After what seemed like an eternity, a doctor came to talk to her. He explained that she had experienced a mild heart attack. She would need to stay in the hospital for a few days for observation and tests. Margaret was relieved that it wasn't worse, but she was still worried about Rusty. She asked the doctor about him, her voice weak and shaky. The doctor assured her that they had contacted the Asheville Animal Rescue, the same organization that had rescued Rusty from the storm drain. They had agreed to take him in temporarily until Margaret was able to return home. Margaret felt a wave of relief wash over her. She knew Rusty would be safe with them, but she still missed him terribly. She longed for his comforting presence, his soft purr, the warmth of his body curled up on her lap. The days in the hospital were long and lonely. Margaret underwent a series of tests and procedures. She was visited by her children, who flew in from California and New York. They were relieved to see that she was stable, but they were also worried about her. They talked about the future, about the possibility of Margaret moving closer to one of them, or perhaps into an assisted living facility. Margaret resisted the idea. She didn't want to leave her home, her apartment, her memories. And she certainly didn't want to leave Rusty. During one of their visits, Sarah brought Margaret a small, framed photograph. It was a picture of Rusty, taken by one of the volunteers at the Asheville Animal Rescue. He He was curled up in a soft bed, looking healthy and content. Margaret held the photo close to her heart. It was a small comfort, a reminder of the furry companion who was waiting for her at home. After 5 days, Margaret was finally discharged from the hospital. She was weak and tired, but she was grateful to be alive. She was given a list of medications to take and instructions to follow up with a cardiologist. When she arrived back at her apartment, she was greeted by a volunteer from the Asheville Animal Rescue who had brought Rusty back. The moment Rusty saw her, he ran to her, meowing loudly, rubbing against her legs. Margaret knelt down, her heart overflowing with love. She picked him up and held him close, burying her face in his soft fur. He purred loudly, his body vibrating against hers. "Oh, Rusty," she whispered. "I missed you so much." The reunion was bittersweet. Margaret was overjoyed to be back home with Rusty, but she was also aware of her own fragility. The heart attack had been a wake-up call, a reminder that she was not invincible. In the weeks that followed, Margaret focused on regaining her strength. She followed her doctor's orders, took her medications, and ate a healthy diet. Rusty was her constant companion, her furry nurse, always by her side. He seemed to sense her vulnerability, her need for comfort. He would curl up on her lap when she was resting, purr softly when she was feeling down, and follow her around the apartment, as if guarding her. Margaret knew that she couldn't ignore the concerns of her children. She had to think about the future, about what would happen if she had another health scare. But she was determined to stay in her home, with Rusty, for as long as possible. She started to make some small changes. She arranged for a home health aide to come in a few times a week to help with chores and errands. She signed up for a meal delivery service to ensure she was eating properly. And she started to wear a medical alert bracelet in case of emergencies. She also had a conversation with her neighbor, a kind woman named Eleanor, who lived across the hall. She asked Eleanor if she would be willing to check on her and Rusty occasionally, and to have a spare key to her apartment in case of emergencies. Eleanor readily agreed. Margaret was taking steps to ensure her own well-being and Rusty's, but the scare had left a mark. She was more aware of her mortality, of the preciousness of each day, and she was more grateful than ever for the love and companionship of her furry friend, the ginger cat who had rescued her from loneliness, and who continued to be her source of strength and comfort. The health scare had been a frightening experience, but it had also reinforced the unbreakable bond between them, a bond forged in a moment of crisis and strengthened by the shared journey of life. The aftermath of Margaret's heart attack brought about an unexpected change in her life, a growing connection with her community. While Rusty had always been her primary companion, the incident highlighted her need for human interaction and support, and, surprisingly, Rusty himself played a role in fostering these new connections. One sunny afternoon, a few weeks after Margaret's return from the hospital, she decided to take Rusty for a walk in the park. She was feeling stronger, and the fresh air and sunshine were invigorating. Rusty, on his red harness and leash, trotted happily beside her, sniffing at the flowers and chasing after butterflies. As they were walking, they encountered a group of people sitting on a bench, chatting and laughing. One of them, a woman with a friendly smile, noticed Rusty. "Oh, what a beautiful cat," she exclaimed. "What's his name?" Margaret smiled. "His name is Rusty." The woman introduced herself as Carol, and the others in the group introduced themselves as well. They were members of a local pet owners club who met regularly in the park to socialize and share tips about pet care. Carol invited Margaret to join them, and she hesitantly agreed. She sat down on the bench, Rusty settling down at her feet. The group welcomed her warmly, asking her about Rusty's story, about her health, about her life in Asheville. Margaret found herself opening up, sharing her experiences with these strangers. She talked about how she had rescued Rusty from the storm drain, about how he had helped her cope with loneliness and grief, about her recent heart attack. The group listened with empathy and understanding. They shared their own stories of their pets, of the joys and challenges of pet ownership, of the ways their animals had enriched their lives. Margaret realized that she was no longer alone. She had found a community of like-minded people who shared her love of animals, who who understood the importance of companionship, who were willing to offer support and friendship. Over the next few weeks, Margaret became a regular member of the Pet Owners Club. She looked forward to their weekly meetings in the park, to the lively conversations, the shared laughter, the sense of belonging. Rusty, too, seemed to enjoy the social interaction, happily greeting the other pets and their owners. Through the club, Margaret met other people in her neighborhood, people she had seen before but had never really connected with. She learned about local events and activities, about volunteer opportunities, about resources available to seniors. One day, she met a woman named Susan, who lived in the same apartment building as her. Susan had a small dog, a fluffy white terrier named Snowy. They discovered that they had a lot in common, and they started to walk their pets together regularly. Susan became a close friend, someone Margaret could rely on, someone she could talk to about anything. They would often have coffee together in Margaret's apartment, sharing stories and laughter, their pets curled up at their feet. Margaret also started to volunteer at the Asheville Animal Rescue, the organization that had helped her rescue Rusty. She would go there once a week to help with cleaning, feeding, and socializing the animals. It was her way of giving back, of showing her gratitude for the organization that had brought Rusty into her life. The experience was rewarding. She found joy in caring for the animals, in providing them with comfort and attention. She also enjoyed interacting with the staff and other volunteers, sharing her love of animals and her passion for their welfare. She even began to recognize some of the people who came to adopt, having indirectly fostered connections through her story of Rusty, often recounted by the rescue workers. One day, a young couple came to the shelter looking for a cat to adopt. Margaret saw them looking at a small, shy kitten, and she couldn't help but approach them. She told them her story about how she had rescued Rusty, about how he had changed her life. She encouraged them to consider adopting the kitten, to experience the joy and companionship that a pet can bring. The couple was moved by her story, and they decided to adopt the kitten. They thanked Margaret for her kindness and her encouragement. Margaret felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had not only helped an animal find a home, but she had also shared her own experience, inspiring others to open their hearts and homes to pets in need. Through her involvement with the animal rescue, Margaret also became more aware of the challenges faced by many elderly people in her community. She learned about seniors who were struggling with loneliness, isolation, and lack of access to resources. She decided to do something to help. She started volunteering for a local organization that provided companionship and support to seniors living alone. She would visit elderly people in their homes, chat with them, read to them, or simply listen to their stories. She found that her own experiences, her own struggles with loneliness and grief, made her particularly empathetic to the needs of others. She was able to connect with them on a deeper level to offer comfort and understanding. One of the people she visited was an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, who lived in a small apartment a few blocks from hers. Mr. Henderson was a widower, like Margaret, and he had no family living nearby. He was often lonely and depressed. Margaret would visit him twice a week, bringing Rusty with her. Mr. Henderson loved animals, and he quickly bonded with Rusty. He would stroke his fur, talk to him, and even share his cookies with him. Rusty, in his own gentle way, brought joy and companionship to Mr. Henderson's life. He would curl up on his lap, purr softly, and listen patiently to his stories. Margaret saw the positive impact Rusty was having on Mr. Henderson, and she realized that she had found another way to use her experiences and Rusty's unique charm to make a difference in the lives of others. The community connections that Margaret had forged, initially sparked by Rusty's rescue and then amplified by her health scare, had blossomed into a network of support, friendship, and purpose. She was no longer the lonely widow living in isolation. She was an active member of her community, a valued friend, a compassionate volunteer, a source of inspiration to others. Rusty, the small ginger cat who had once been trapped and frightened, had not only transformed Margaret's life, but he had also helped her to connect with the world around her, to find new meaning and purpose in her later years. He was a catalyst for change, a furry ambassador of kindness and connection. He was living proof that even the smallest of creatures can have a profound impact on the lives of others, and that one act of kindness can ripple outwards, creating a wave of positive change that touches countless lives. The city of Asheville, once a backdrop to her solitary existence, was now a vibrant tapestry of relationships, woven together by the common thread of compassion and sparked by the unlikely friendship between a woman and her cat. The passage of time brought with it the inevitable changes of aging, both for Margaret and Rusty. Margaret's steps became slower, her energy levels lower. Rusty, too, was showing signs of age. His once vibrant ginger fur was now streaked with gray, his playful pounces were less frequent, and his naps were longer. One quiet evening, as Margaret sat in her armchair, knitting, with Rusty curled up on her lap, she reflected on the journey they had shared. She remembered the day she had found him, a small, shivering creature trapped in a storm drain. She remembered the early days of their companionship, the gradual blossoming of their bond, the way he had filled the void in her life. She thought about the health scare she had experienced, the fear she had felt, the realization of her own mortality. She remembered the kindness of the paramedics, the support of her children, the comfort of knowing that Rusty was being cared for. She thought about the community connection she had made, the friends she had found, the way she had been able to give back to make a difference in the lives of others. All of it, she realized, had stemmed from that one act of kindness, that decision to rescue a frightened cat. She looked down at Rusty, his eyes closed, his body rising and falling with each gentle breath. He was no longer the young, energetic cat he had once been, but his presence was still a source of immense comfort and joy. She stroked his soft fur, feeling the familiar rumble of his purr. She knew that their time together was finite, that one day she would have to say goodbye. The thought brought tears to her eyes, but she also felt a sense of deep gratitude for the years they had shared, for the love and companionship that had enriched her life beyond measure. She had been thinking a lot about the future, about what would happen to Rusty when she was no longer able to care for him. She had discussed it with her children, and they had assured her that they would find a loving home for him if the time came. But Margaret wanted to make her own arrangements to ensure that Rusty would be well cared for, that he would be surrounded by love and kindness. She decided to contact the Asheville Animal Rescue, the organization that had played such a crucial role in their lives. She spoke to the director, explaining her situation, her concerns for Rusty's future. The director listened patiently, and then she made a suggestion. She proposed that Margaret become a foster-to-adopt caregiver for Rusty. This meant that Rusty would remain in Margaret's care for as long as she was able. But the animal rescue would officially own him, and they would be responsible for finding him a permanent home when the time came. Margaret was relieved and grateful. This arrangement gave her peace of mind, knowing that Rusty's future was secure, that he would be cared for by an organization she trusted. She also decided to update her will, making provisions for Rusty's care. She left a sum of money to the Asheville Animal Rescue, specifically designated for Rusty's needs, to ensure that he would have everything he needed for the rest of his life. With these arrangements in place, Margaret felt a sense of calm acceptance. She had faced the future, made the necessary preparations, and she could now focus on enjoying the time she had left with Rusty. Their days continued to be filled with quiet routines, with simple pleasures. They still took their walks in the park, although they were shorter and slower now. They still enjoyed their evenings together, Margaret reading or watching television, Rusty curled up on her lap. Margaret continued to volunteer at the animal rescue and to visit Mr. Henderson, although less frequently now. She cherished the connection she had made, the friendships she had forged, the sense of community that had enriched her life. She knew that she was fortunate. She had found love and companionship in unexpected places. She had overcome challenges, faced her fears, and found a way to live a meaningful life, even in her later years. And she had Rusty, her faithful companion, to thank for much of it. He had been her rescuer, her friend, her furry angel. He had brought light into her darkness, joy into her sorrow, companionship into her loneliness. He had taught her the power of kindness, the importance of connection, the enduring beauty of love. As she sat there, stroking his fur, she whispered, "Thank you, Rusty. Thank you for everything." He looked up at her, his amber eyes filled with a gentle, knowing gaze. He licked her hand, a small, comforting gesture. It was a moment of perfect understanding, of unspoken love, a testament to the enduring bond between a woman and her cat, a bond that had transformed both of their lives, and that would continue to sustain them through whatever the future held. Years had passed, softening the edges of time, leaving their mark on both Margaret and Rusty. Margaret's hair was now completely white, her steps even slower, her hands gnarled with arthritis. Rusty, his ginger fur faded and thin, moved with a stiff, deliberate gait, his once bright amber eyes now clouded with age. The apartment on Elm Street remained their sanctuary, a haven filled with the accumulated memories of their long life together. The bookshelves were still overflowing. The armchair by the window still held the imprint of their shared hours. The air still smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. It was a quiet evening, much like many others they had shared. A gentle rain was falling outside, drumming softly against the window panes. Margaret sat in her armchair, a thick blanket draped over her legs. Rusty lay curled up on her lap, his body a familiar weight, his purr a low, rumbling vibration. Margaret was no longer able to knit or read for long periods, her eyesight failing. But she still enjoyed listening to music, to old recordings of Thomas's favorite songs. Tonight, she was listening to a collection of classic jazz tunes, the mellow sounds filling the quiet room. She stroked Rusty's fur, feeling the frail bones beneath his thin coat. He was nearing the end of his life, she knew. He was sleeping more, eating less, his movements increasingly labored. But his presence was still a source of immense comfort, his love a constant, unwavering flame. She thought back over the years, over the journey they had shared. She remembered the fateful morning when she had found him, a small, frightened creature trapped in a storm drain. She remembered the joy he had brought into her life, the loneliness he had dispelled, the connections he had helped her to forge. She remembered the health scare, the fear she had felt, the relief of knowing that Rusty would be cared for. She remembered the friends she had made, the community she had found, the way she had been able to give back. She remembered the conversations she had had with her children, the arrangements she had made for Rusty's future, the peace of mind she had found in knowing that he would be loved and protected. All of it, she realized, had been a gift of love, of companionship, of resilience, of grace. A gift that had transformed her life, had given her purpose and meaning, had helped her to navigate the challenges of aging with courage and dignity. As the music played, she closed her eyes, letting the memories wash over her. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, of peace, of acceptance. She had lived a full life, a life filled with love and loss, with joy and sorrow, with challenges and triumphs. She had found love in unexpected places, had discovered the power of kindness, had learned the importance of connection. And she had shared it all with a small ginger cat, a furry companion who had been her constant source of strength and comfort. Rusty stirred on her lap, shifting his position slightly. He let out a soft sigh, a contented sound. Margaret opened her eyes and looked down at him. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and even. She continued to stroke his fur, her touch gentle and loving. She knew that he wouldn't be with her much longer. But she wasn't afraid. She had made peace with the inevitable. She had said all that needed to be said, had done all that needed to be done. She was ready. As the evening drew to a close, the rain outside stopped. The clouds parted, revealing a sliver of moon, casting a pale light through the window. Margaret looked out at the night sky, at the twinkling stars. She felt a sense of connection to something larger than herself, to the universe, to the eternal cycle of life and death. She felt a sense of peace, of belonging, of being part of something beautiful and profound. Rusty let out a final, soft sigh. His breathing stopped. His body relaxed. He was gone. Margaret held him close, her tears falling silently onto his fur. She didn't cry out, didn't wail. She simply held him, cradling him in her arms, feeling the last vestiges of his warmth. She sat there for a long time, in the quiet stillness of the apartment, with the memories of their life together swirling around her. She felt a deep sense of loss, but also a profound sense of gratitude. She had loved him, and he had loved her. And that love, that bond, would endure long after his physical presence was gone. It would live on in her heart, in her memories, in the stories she would tell, in the lives he had touched. Eventually, she rose from her chair, her movements slow and deliberate. She carried Rusty's body to the bedroom and gently placed him on her bed, on the pillow where he had often slept beside her. She looked at him one last time, his face peaceful, his body at rest. She whispered a final goodbye, a promise to remember him always. Then, she turned and walked back to the living room. She sat down in her armchair, the blanket still draped over her legs. The apartment was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. She closed her eyes, and she waited. She waited for the dawn, for the new day, for the continuation of life, without her furry companion by her side. But she was not alone. She was surrounded by memories, by love, by the enduring legacy of a small ginger cat named Rusty, who had changed her life forever. The quiet evening was a testament, not to an ending, but to a love that transcended time, a bond that would forever remain, etched in the quiet corners of her heart.
She thought it was just a thief stealing her food, until she discovered the truth. Eleanor lived a life of quiet routine in her small, two-story house in the outskirts of Harmony Creek, Pennsylvania. The town itself was a relic of a bygone era, a place where neighbors still waved from their porches, and the local diner was the hub of all social activity. Eleanor, however, preferred the solitude of her home, the company of her books, and the gentle tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. She was 82, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and experience, her hands gnarled but still surprisingly strong. Her silver hair was always neatly pinned up, a testament to a lifetime of discipline and order. Every morning, she'd wake at precisely 6 a.m., make herself a cup of weak tea and a slice of toast with marmalade, and sit by the kitchen window, watching the sun slowly paint the sky with hues of pink and gold. Her kitchen was the heart of the house, a cozy space filled with the scent of old wood and decades of home-cooked meals. Sunshine streamed through the lace-curtained windows, illuminating the worn, floral-patterned wallpaper and the collection of antique teacups displayed on a shelf. For the past few weeks, however, a subtle disruption had entered Eleanor's meticulously ordered life. It began with the food. She'd always measured out her portions carefully, a habit ingrained from years of living alone and a frugal upbringing. But lately, things were disappearing. A small wedge of cheese left uncovered on the counter, a few slices of ham from the refrigerator, even a half-eaten bowl of oatmeal, which Eleanor distinctly remembered leaving on the table after a particularly restless night. At first, she dismissed it as forgetfulness. Getting old? She'd mutter to herself, shaking her head and adjusting her glasses. But the disappearances continued, and they were accompanied by other, more unsettling signs. A faint rustling sound in the pantry late at night. A scattering of crumbs on the floor that she hadn't noticed before. A faint, almost imperceptible, musky odor that lingered in the air. One evening, after finding a bag of bread rolls torn open and partially devoured, Eleanor decided she'd had enough. She was a woman of logic and reason, and there had to be an explanation. Mice, perhaps? It was an old house, after all. But she'd never had a problem with rodents before, and she kept her kitchen impeccably clean. That night, she stayed up later than usual, sitting in her armchair in the living room, a book open on her lap but her eyes unfocused. The only light came from a small table lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The grandfather clock chimed 11. Its deep, resonant tones echoing through the silent house. Eleanor held her breath, listening intently. There it was again, a faint scratching sound, followed by a soft thud, coming from the kitchen. Her heart beat a little faster, a mixture of apprehension and determination filling her chest. She slowly rose from her chair, her joints creaking in protest, and picked up a sturdy wooden cane that she kept by the door, a gift from her son, Michael, who worried about her living alone. Holding the cane tightly, she crept towards the kitchen, her footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rug that covered the hallway floor. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible beyond. She paused, listening again. The rustling had stopped. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor pushed the door open and flicked on the overhead light. The kitchen was in disarray. A bag of flour had been knocked over, its contents spilled across the counter and floor like a fresh snowfall. A carton of milk lay on its side, a small puddle forming beneath it, and in the center of the chaos, perched on the edge of the sink, was a cat. A ginger cat, with fur the color of a sunset, stared back at her with wide amber eyes. It was thin, almost gaunt, its ribs visible beneath its fur. It held a piece of ham in its mouth, frozen mid-chew, as if caught in the act. Eleanor stood there, stunned, the cane slipping slightly in her grasp. She hadn't expected this. A cat, but not just any cat. This one looked desperate. The cat let out a soft, almost apologetic meow, and then, with a swift movement, leaped off the sink and disappeared through a small, previously unnoticed gap beneath the back door. Eleanor stood there for a long moment, the silence of the kitchen broken only by the dripping of the spilled milk. She looked around at the mess, a strange mix of annoyance and pity washing over her. This wasn't the work of a mischievous pet. This was the act of a creature driven by hunger. And somewhere, in the back of her mind, a faint memory stirred. A memory of her own struggles, her own desperation, when her children were young and money was tight. The discovery of the ginger cat, while initially startling, did little to quell Eleanor's unease. If anything, it deepened the mystery. Where had the cat come from? How was it getting in and out of the house so easily? And, more importantly, why was it so thin and desperate for food? The gap under the back door, a result of the old wood warping over time, was the obvious entry point. Eleanor made a temporary fix with some rolled-up towels and a heavy brick, but she knew it wouldn't hold for long. A determined cat, especially one driven by hunger, could find a way around almost any obstacle. The following days were filled with a strange tension. Eleanor went about her routine, but her senses were heightened, her ears attuned to every creak and rustle. She found herself constantly glancing at the back door, half expecting to see the ginger cat reappear. She even started leaving small scraps of food, a bit of cooked chicken, a saucer of milk near the gap, a hesitant offering to the unknown intruder. The food always disappeared, but she never saw the cat. It was as if it were a ghost, a phantom presence that haunted the edges of her awareness. She started calling it Ginger, a simple, descriptive name that felt less impersonal than the cat. One afternoon, while tending to her small garden at the back of the house, Eleanor noticed something she hadn't seen before. A faint trail, barely visible in the tall grass, leading away from the house and towards a dense thicket of bushes at the edge of her property. Curiosity overcoming her caution, she followed the trail, her cane tapping lightly on the uneven ground. The trail led her to a small, hidden hollow beneath a sprawling rhododendron bush. The air was cool and damp, the sunlight filtered through the leaves creating dappled patterns on the ground. And there, nestled amongst the roots and fallen leaves, were 3 tiny kittens. They were ginger, just like the mother cat, their fur still soft and downy. They were curled up together, a ball of sleeping fluff, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath. They were incredibly small, no bigger than her cupped hands. Eleanor knelt down, her old knees protesting, and gazed at the kittens. A wave of tenderness washed over her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. They were so vulnerable, so completely dependent on their mother. And that mother, the feline felon she'd been pursuing, was simply trying to survive, to provide for her young. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't been dealing with a pest, but with a mother in need. A mother who, in her own way, was just as desperate and determined as Eleanor herself had been all those years ago. The memory surfaced unbidden, sharp and clear. Her husband, Frank, had been laid off from the steel mill. They had 2 young children, Michael and Sarah, to feed and clothe. Money was scarce, and Eleanor had spent countless nights lying awake, worrying about how they would make ends meet. She'd taken on extra sewing jobs, mending clothes for neighbors, and had even considered selling her grandmother's antique brooch, a cherished family heirloom. She remembered the gnawing feeling of hunger, the constant anxiety, the fierce determination to protect her children from the harsh realities of their situation. She'd hidden her own worries behind a brave smile, reassuring them that everything would be all right, even when she wasn't sure herself. Now, looking at these tiny kittens, she saw a reflection of her own past struggles. She understood the mother cat's desperation, the primal instinct to provide for her offspring, no matter the cost. A soft meow startled her from her reverie. She looked up and saw Ginger standing at the edge of the hollow, watching her with wary eyes. The cat was even thinner than she remembered, her fur matted and dull. But there was a fierce protectiveness in her gaze, a silent warning to stay away from her kittens. Eleanor slowly rose to her feet, her hands held out in a gesture of peace. "It's all right, Ginger," she whispered. "I'm not going to hurt them. I understand." The cat didn't move, but her eyes seemed to soften slightly. Eleanor took a step back, giving the mother cat space. She knew she couldn't force a connection. It would take time, patience, and a lot of trust. The encounter in the garden marked a turning point in Eleanor's relationship with Ginger and her kittens. The initial fear and suspicion were replaced by a growing empathy, a recognition of a shared struggle across species. Eleanor knew she couldn't simply stand by and watch the cat starve. She had to help, but helping a feral cat, especially one with kittens, was easier said than done. Ginger was wary and elusive, always keeping a safe distance. Eleanor tried leaving food closer to the hollow, hoping to gain the cat's trust, but Ginger would only approach once Eleanor was back inside the house. Eleanor started researching feral cats online, using the old desktop computer her son Michael had set up for her a few years ago. She learned about their behavior, their needs, and the challenges they faced. She discovered that there were organizations dedicated to helping feral cats, offering trap-neuter return, TNR, programs to control their populations and prevent further suffering. But Eleanor hesitated to contact any of these organizations. She wasn't sure she wanted to subject Ginger and her kittens to the stress of being trapped and handled by strangers. She felt a growing personal connection to these animals, a sense of responsibility that went beyond simply providing food. She decided to try a more gradual approach, a slow and patient process of building trust. Every day, she'd leave food and fresh water near the hollow, talking softly to Ginger even if she couldn't see her. She'd sit in her garden, a safe distance away, and simply observe the cats, learning their routines and their personalities. She discovered that the kittens were becoming more adventurous, venturing out from the hollow to explore their surroundings. They were playful and curious, batting at butterflies and chasing each other through the tall grass. Eleanor found herself smiling at their antics, a warmth spreading through her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. One afternoon, while Eleanor was refilling the water bowl, one of the kittens, bolder than the others, approached her. It was a tiny thing, with bright orange fur and wide, curious eyes. It sniffed at her outstretched hand, its whiskers twitching, and then, to Eleanor's surprise, it let out a soft, hesitant purr. Eleanor's heart melted. She gently stroked the kitten's head, feeling the soft fur beneath her fingers. The kitten leaned into her touch, its purr growing louder. It was a moment of pure connection, a bridge built across the divide between human and animal. From that day on, the kittens became more accustomed to Eleanor's presence. They would run to greet her when she came outside, rubbing against her legs and purring contentedly. Ginger remained cautious, but she no longer seemed to view Eleanor as a threat. She would watch from a distance, her amber eyes softening as she saw her kittens interacting with the old woman. Eleanor started naming the kittens. The bold one, the first to approach her, she named Rusty. The smallest and shyest, she called Sunny, for his slightly lighter shade of ginger. And the third, who was always getting into mischief, she named Patches, for a small, darker patch of fur on his back. The kitchen, once the scene of a nightly burglary, became a sanctuary. Eleanor, finally finding a permanent solution, fixed the gap. She placed a small cat flap and started leaving food inside. Ginger, hesitant at first, eventually learned to use the flap, coming and going as she pleased. Eleanor found a strange comfort in knowing that the cat and her kittens had a safe place to eat and rest, even when she wasn't around. The food mysteriously missing became a normal. The mess, though, was still an occasional issue. Eleanor would sometimes find paw prints on the counter or a spilled bag of cat food on the floor. But she no longer minded. It was a small price to pay for the joy and companionship these cats had brought into her life. The presence of Ginger and her kittens stirred something deep within Eleanor, awakening memories and emotions that had long been dormant. The simple act of caring for these animals, of providing for their needs, brought back a flood of recollections from her own past, her own experiences as a mother. She found herself thinking more and more about Michael and Sarah, her two children. They were grown now, with families of their own, living far away in different states. Michael, a successful engineer, lived in California with his wife and two teenage daughters. Sarah, a teacher, resided in Colorado with her husband and a young son. Eleanor loved her children dearly, but she saw them infrequently. Their lives were busy, filled with work and family obligations. They called regularly, of course, and sent cards and photos, but it wasn't the same as having them close by. She missed the daily interactions, the shared meals, the simple comfort of their presence. She remembered the days when they were young, their house filled with laughter and the constant buzz of activity. She remembered the scraped knees and bedtime stories, the school plays and family vacations. She remembered the challenges, too, the financial struggles and the sleepless nights, but those memories were overshadowed by a profound sense of love and fulfillment. Watching Ginger care for her kittens, Eleanor saw a reflection of her own maternal instincts. The way Ginger meticulously groomed her young, the way she protected them from danger, the way she patiently taught them how to hunt and survive. It all resonated deeply with Eleanor's own experiences. She remembered the countless hours she'd spent caring for Michael and Sarah, nurturing them, guiding them, helping them grow into the independent adults they had become. She remembered the sacrifices she'd made, the times she'd put their needs before her own, the unwavering love that had driven her every action. One evening, while sitting on the porch swing, watching the kittens play in the fading light, Eleanor found herself talking to Ginger, as if the cat could understand her. "You know, Ginger," she said softly, "being a mother is the hardest job in the world, but it's also the most rewarding. You give everything you have, and sometimes it feels like it's not enough. But then you see them grow, you see them thrive, and you know it was all worth it." Ginger, who was lying nearby, nursing her kittens, looked up at Eleanor and let out a soft, almost understanding meow. It was a moment of shared connection, a silent acknowledgement of the universal bond of motherhood. Eleanor started digging out old photo albums, dusting off the covers and turning the pages, each image a portal to the past. There were pictures of Michael and Sarah as babies, their chubby cheeks and bright, curious eyes. There were pictures of family holidays, birthday parties, and school events. There were pictures of Frank, her late husband, his arm around her shoulders, a smile on his face. Looking at these photos, Eleanor felt a pang of sadness, a longing for those days when her family was whole, when her house was filled with life and laughter. But the sadness was mixed with a sense of gratitude, a deep appreciation for the memories she had created, the love she had shared. She realized that the cats, in their own way, had helped her reconnect with those memories, had reminded her of the joy and fulfillment of motherhood. They had filled a void in her life, a void that she hadn't even realized was there until they had arrived. The bond between Eleanor and the cats continued to deepen. What started as a cautious truce had blossomed into a genuine friendship, a connection built on mutual respect and affection. Eleanor no longer saw Ginger as a stray, but as a member of her extended family, a furry companion who brought a spark of life back into her quiet home. The kitchen became a shared space. Eleanor would prepare her own meals while Ginger and the kittens ate their cat food nearby. Sometimes Rusty, the boldest of the kittens, would try to sneak a lick of Eleanor's milk or a nibble of her cheese, but Eleanor would gently shoo him away, a playful scolding in her voice. She'd even started baking special treats for the cats, small, unsalted biscuits made with tuna or chicken, recipes she'd found online. The kittens would devour them with gusto, their purrs a symphony of feline contentment. The routine became a comfort. The early morning feeding, the afternoon playtime in the garden, the evening quiet as Ginger and the kittens curled up in a basket Eleanor had placed in the corner of the kitchen. These small rituals filled Eleanor's days with purpose and a sense of connection she hadn't realized she was missing. One day, Michael called. It was a Sunday, their usual time to chat. He sounded cheerful, asking about her health, the weather, and the latest news from Harmony Creek. Eleanor, as always, downplayed any difficulties, assuring him that she was doing just fine. "So, Mom," Michael said, after a pause, "anything new happening?" Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't told her children about the cats yet. She wasn't sure how they'd react. They'd always been supportive of her independence, but they also worried about her living alone. They might see the cats as a burden, a sign that she was struggling to cope. "Well," she said slowly, "there is something. I have some new companions." "Companions?" Michael sounded intrigued. "What kind of companions?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "They're cats," she said. "A mother cat and her 3 kittens. They were strays, but they're living with me now." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Eleanor held her breath, waiting for his reaction. "Cats?" Michael finally said. "Wow, Mom, that's unexpected. Are you sure you can handle that? It sounds like a lot of work." "They're not much trouble," Eleanor said quickly. "They're mostly outdoors, but they come inside to eat and sleep. They're company." She couldn't quite bring herself to say friends, fearing it would sound too sentimental. "Well, as long as you're happy, Mom," Michael said, his voice a little hesitant. "Just be careful, okay? Don't let them scratch you or anything." "I'm being careful," Eleanor assured him. "They're very sweet, actually." She didn't tell him about the messy kitchen, the occasional shredded toilet paper roll, or the time Rusty had climbed the curtains and nearly brought them crashing down. She wanted to present a picture of calm and control, even though her life had become considerably more chaotic and considerably more joyful since the cats had arrived. Sarah's reaction, when Eleanor called her the following week, was similar. Concern mixed with a touch of amusement. "Cats, Mom? Really? You always said you were more of a dog person." "Well, these cats chose me," Eleanor said with a chuckle. "I didn't have much say in the matter." She described Ginger and the kittens, their personalities, their antics. She even sent Sarah some photos, pictures of the kittens playing in the garden and curled up asleep in their basket. Sarah, being a teacher and a mother herself, seemed to understand the emotional connection more readily than Michael. "They sound adorable, Mom," she said. "I'm glad you have them. It's good for you to have something to care for." Eleanor felt a wave of relief. Her children, while concerned, were ultimately supportive. They trusted her judgment, even if they didn't fully understand her newfound attachment to these feline companions. The support of her children, even from afar, gave Eleanor a renewed sense of confidence. She was managing just fine. In fact, she was thriving. The cats had brought a sense of purpose and joy back into her life, a feeling she hadn't realized she'd been missing until they arrived. They were a reminder that even in the quietest of lives, unexpected connections could blossom, bringing warmth and companionship where once there was only solitude. The bridge of biscuits and kindness had been built, not just between Eleanor and the cats, but also, in a subtle way, between Eleanor and her own children, strengthening the bonds of family across the miles. The months passed, and the seasons changed. The vibrant greens of summer faded into the warm golds and reds of autumn, and then the bare branches and crisp air of winter arrived. Through it all, the cats remained a constant presence in Eleanor's life, a source of comfort and companionship. The kittens grew quickly, their playful awkwardness giving way to the sleek grace of young cats. They still followed Ginger everywhere, learning the ways of the world from their patient and protective mother. They explored the garden, chased mice in the fields, and occasionally brought Eleanor gifts: a dead bird, a half-eaten lizard, which she politely accepted and then discreetly disposed of. Eleanor continued her routine, her days punctuated by the comings and goings of the cats. She'd leave the cat flap open during the day, and they'd come and go as they pleased, often returning in the evening for a meal and a warm place to sleep. The kitchen, once her solitary domain, was now a shared space, filled with the soft purrs and playful meows of her feline companions. One cold winter evening, as Eleanor sat by the fireplace, reading a book, she found herself reflecting on her life. The house was quiet, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the gentle hum of the refrigerator. The cats were curled up asleep in their basket, a furry pile of contentment. She thought about her children, Michael and Sarah, and her grandchildren. She missed them, of course, but she also felt a sense of peace. They were living their own lives, building their own families, and she was proud of them. She knew they loved her, even if they couldn't be with her as often as she'd like. She thought about Frank, her late husband. They'd had a good life together, filled with love, laughter, and the shared challenges and joys of raising a family. She missed him terribly, but she also carried his memory with her, a warm presence in her heart. She realized that her life, while quiet, was not empty. She had her books, her garden, her memories, and now she had the cats. They had filled a void she hadn't even realized was there, a need for companionship and connection that had grown stronger as she'd gotten older. The empty nest syndrome, that feeling of loneliness and loss that many parents experience when their children leave home, had never truly affected Eleanor. She'd always been independent and self-sufficient, content with her own company. But the cats had shown her that even the most solitary of hearts can benefit from unexpected companionship. They had taught her the simple joy of caring for another living creature, the unconditional love that animals can offer, the way their presence can brighten even the darkest of days. They had reminded her of her own capacity for love and compassion, a capacity that had perhaps been dormant, but never truly gone. She looked at Ginger, asleep in the basket, her kittens nestled close beside her. She saw a reflection of her own life, a cycle of motherhood, of nurturing and letting go. She knew that the kittens would eventually leave, strike out on their own, just as her own children had done. It was the natural order of things. And while a part of her would be sad to see them go, she also knew that she would be okay. She had found a strength within herself, a resilience that she hadn't fully appreciated before. The cats had helped her rediscover that strength, had reminded her that even in the later years of life, there was still room for growth, for connection, for joy. The heart, she realized, was never truly empty. It might be quiet, it might be lonely at times, but it was always capable of expanding, of making room for new love, new connections, new experiences. The cats had proven that to her, in their own quiet, furry way. They had filled her empty nest with a fullness she hadn't expected, a fullness that warmed her from the inside out. Spring arrived, bringing with it a renewed sense of life and energy. The garden burst into bloom, the trees leafed out, and the air was filled with the songs of birds. The kittens, now almost fully grown, were more independent than ever, spending most of their days exploring the fields and woods surrounding Eleanor's property. One morning, Eleanor noticed that Rusty was missing. She called for him, searched the garden, but he was nowhere to be found. Ginger seemed unconcerned, going about her usual routine, but Eleanor felt a growing sense of unease. Rusty didn't return that day or the next. Eleanor started to worry. Had he gotten lost? Had he been injured? Had he fallen prey to a predator? The possibilities, each more frightening than the last, swirled in her mind. A week passed, and still no sign of Rusty. Eleanor's hope began to dwindle. She knew that feral cats faced many dangers, and that their lives were often short and harsh. But she'd grown so attached to Rusty, to his bold and playful spirit. The thought of losing him was unbearable. Then, one afternoon, while Eleanor was working in the garden, she heard a faint meow. She looked up and saw Patches, limping towards her, his fur matted and dirty. He was clearly injured, his left front leg hanging limp. Eleanor rushed to him, her heart pounding. She gently examined his leg, feeling a sickening crunch beneath her fingers. It was broken. She immediately took Patches inside, wrapping him in a soft towel. She called the local veterinarian, her voice trembling with urgency. The vet agreed to see Patches right away. The drive to the vet's office was agonizing. Eleanor held Patches close, whispering soothing words to him, trying to keep him calm. He was in pain, his breathing shallow and rapid. The vet examined Patches, confirming that his leg was broken. He said that he could set the bone, but that the recovery would be long and difficult. There was also a risk of infection. Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Do whatever you can," she said. "I'll pay whatever it takes." Patches underwent surgery, and Eleanor waited anxiously in the waiting room. The hours stretched on, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, the vet emerged, his face grim. "The surgery went as well as it could," he said. "But Patches is very weak. He's lost a lot of blood. We've given him antibiotics and pain medication, but it's still touch and go." Eleanor stayed with Patches at the vet's office for the rest of the day, stroking his fur, talking to him softly. He was unconscious, his breathing labored. As evening approached, the vet suggested that Eleanor go home and get some rest. He promised to call her if there was any change. Eleanor reluctantly agreed. She kissed Patches on the head, whispered a goodbye, and drove home, her heart heavy with grief. The phone rang early the next morning. It was the vet. Patches had passed away during the night. Eleanor felt a wave of sorrow wash over her, so intense that it took her breath away. She'd known that this was a possibility, but the reality of it was devastating. She'd lost Rusty and now Patches, 2 of the 3 kittens gone in such a short span of time. She went to the vet's office to collect Patches' body. She buried him in the garden, near the rhododendron bush where she'd first found the kittens. She made a small wooden cross to mark his grave. Sonny, the remaining kitten, seemed to sense the loss. He was subdued, staying close to Eleanor, his usual playfulness gone. Ginger, too, seemed to mourn, spending hours sitting by Patches' grave. A few weeks later, Sonny disappeared. Eleanor searched and searched, but he was never seen again. It was as if the cycle of life, so beautifully embodied by the arrival of the kittens, was now reversing itself, taking them away one by one. Ginger remained. She was older now, her movements slower, her fur less vibrant, but she still sought out Eleanor's company, curling up on her lap in the evenings, purring softly. Eleanor found herself alone again, more alone than she'd been before the cats had arrived. The house felt empty, the silence deafening. The kitchen, once filled with the playful antics of the kittens, was now quiet and still. She missed them terribly, the furry bundles of energy that had brought so much joy into her life. She missed their purrs, their playful meows, their soft fur against her skin. She missed the sense of purpose they had given her, the feeling of being needed. The garden, once a vibrant playground, now seemed like a memorial, a reminder of the fleeting nature of life and the inevitability of loss. The small wooden crosses marking the graves of Rusty and Patches were a constant reminder of her grief. Eleanor found herself withdrawing, spending more and more time alone. She stopped going to the local diner, stopped attending church services. She even stopped answering the phone as often, letting Michael and Sarah's calls go to voicemail. She felt old and frail. The cats were the last straw of her life. She knew Ginger won't live long. One day, Ginger was also gone. Eleanor was all alone. She sat there, staring at the wall. Tears dropped, but no sound. The house, finally, became silent again.